Hey, welcome back to Minute 60. Tonight we're taking a drive down some very dark roads. True stories of night drives gone wrong. These aren't ghost tales pulled from imagination. They're real experiences shared by people who swore they'd never look at an empty highway the same way again. Before we start, I want to know, have you ever been alone on a road at night, headlights catching nothing but trees and shadows? Tell me in the comments, because some of these stories might make you think twice before your next late-night drive. Now, keep your eyes on the road, your lights on bright and your nerves steady, because what you're about to hear may just follow you the next time you're driving home in the dark. Daniel had been on the road for less than half an hour, but already the silence was pressing in on him. It was just past midnight when he finally left his friend's house, telling himself the long drive back home wouldn't be too bad. He'd done it before, late-night cruises down quiet highways. Sometimes he even liked the solitude. But this time felt different. The first stretch wasn't so bad. The two-lane road wound its way through rolling countryside, with tall grass and scattered trees swaying in the faint summer breeze. His headlights cast a steady cone of light ahead, and the rhythmic thrum of his tires against the pavement was almost hypnotic. For a while, it was comforting, just him, the road, and the soft glow of the dashboard. But as the miles passed, Daniel realized something strange. He hadn't seen another car, not a single pair of headlights coming toward him, not a single set of taillights ahead, no distant truck engines groaning through the night, no late-night drivers passing on their way home. The road was his alone, stretching out into what felt like forever. At first, he told himself it wasn't unusual. Rural highways at night could be like that, long, empty stretches where you might not see another soul for miles. But the emptiness dragged on, 10 minutes, 15, 20, still nothing. The silence started to feel less like peace and more like abandonment, as though the rest of the world had quietly folded itself away, leaving him stranded in some endless pocket of darkness. Daniel glanced at his rearview mirror. Blackness. He checked his side mirrors. More blackness. His own headlights seemed like the only proof of reality left, the only barrier between him and complete oblivion. He cracked the window, hoping for a breeze, some grounding sound. Instead, the night air pressed in, damp, heavy and cold against his face. The faint smell of pine drifted in, along with something else, the smell of damp earth, like the forest floor after rain. It should have been refreshing, but instead it reminded him of basements, of places buried deep underground. Trying to distract himself, Daniel reached for the radio. Static. He switched stations one after the other, but every channel came up empty. No music, no late-night talk shows, not even faint static voices in the background. Just a hiss that grew louder the longer he left it on. With a shiver, he shut it off. The silence that followed was worse. That was when he noticed it. Out of the corner of his eye, just beyond the sweep of his headlights, something moved, a flicker of pale motion in the tree line. He tensed, waiting for a deer to bolt across the road, but nothing came. The shadows swallowed it whole. Daniel forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Just a trick of the light," he whispered. But the sound of his own voice felt too loud in the car, as though it didn't belong. He tried to focus on the road again, keeping his eyes locked on the painted lines that snaked into the dark. But his heart had started to race. The longer he drove, the more he realized this wasn't just another quiet night on the highway. Something about this stretch of road was wrong. It was empty, yes, but it didn't feel abandoned. It felt watched. Daniel leaned back in his seat, stretching his neck, trying to shake off the creeping unease. The hum of the engine was steady, the dashboard lights casting a soft glow across his tired face. But outside those windows, the night seemed endless. The trees on either side of the road rose like dark walls, their branches clawing toward the sky. Every so often, his headlights would catch the silver flash of a trunk or a glint of leaves swaying gently in the night air. But there was something strange about the way the forest seemed to move when he wasn't looking at it directly. At first, he dismissed it as animals. A deer leaping back into the woods, a fox darting across the ditch. Perfectly normal for this stretch of highway. But the longer he drove, the more those movements didn't fit the shape of animals. They weren't low to the ground, they were tall, upright, almost human-like. He caught himself leaning forward, squinting into the darkness, trying to make out what was really there. Each time, the movement would vanish, leaving only shadows. It reminded him of something from his childhood, when he'd stared too long into the corner of his bedroom at night, convinced something stood there just out of sight, only to realize it was his imagination filling the void. But this didn't feel like imagination. This felt like something real. The forest had a rhythm to it now, a pattern. Every few hundred feet, something pale would flicker between the trees. Sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, always disappearing the instant his headlights tried to catch it. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles ached. He told himself to relax, to focus on the road. But the tension in his chest wouldn't let up. He glanced into the rearview mirror, empty highway behind him, stretching into nothing. He flicked his eyes to the passenger side mirror. Only darkness. Yet still, that feeling of being followed crawled over his skin like ants. And then, it happened. For the first time, one of those pale shapes didn't dart away. He caught it clearly, just outside the sweep of his headlights, pacing him in the trees. At first, he thought his mind was breaking from exhaustion, but no, the shape was there, long-limbed, pale against the black forest. It moved with an unsettling ease, its stride keeping perfect pace with his car, as if it wasn't running, wasn't even trying. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He pressed harder on the gas, the car picking up speed, but when he glanced back, the figure was still there, matching him, always just at the edge of sight. That's when the truth hit him. He wasn't just imagining movement, he wasn't just tired. Something or someone was keeping pace with him in the woods, watching, following, and the night suddenly felt a lot longer than the road ahead. Daniel leaned forward in his seat, eyes darting between the road and the blur of trees rushing past. His pulse had settled into a quick, steady rhythm, like a drumbeat he couldn't escape. Every flicker of motion outside made his chest tighten. The pale figure that had paced his car was gone now, swallowed by the dark. But the absence didn't bring relief. If anything, it made things worse. Because Daniel couldn't shake the thought that it hadn't disappeared. It had only moved somewhere he couldn't see. He forced himself to focus, telling his brain over and over, "It's nothing. You're tired. It's a trick of the light." Yet even as he repeated the words, his foot pressed a little heavier on the gas. The engine hummed louder, pulling him faster down the lonely road. Then something changed. At the edge of his high beams, down in the roadside ditch, he caught sight of it again. This time there was no mistaking what he saw. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a fox, it wasn't some drifting trick of his imagination. It was a figure, upright, human-like. Daniel's breath hitched as his eyes locked onto it. The thing crouched low in the ditch, knees bent at impossible angles, arms dangling almost to the ground. Its skin, or what looked like skin, was unnaturally pale, catching the light in flashes before vanishing into shadow. He only saw it for a second before it dropped down, out of view. But that single second was enough to freeze his hands on the wheel. His entire body went cold, as if the night air had seeped straight into his bones. Daniel wanted to believe it was just some stranger, maybe a lost hiker or a drunk who'd stumbled too far from town. But the more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Who would be out here at this hour, miles from anywhere? And why did it look like it was waiting, like it had been crouched in that ditch, watching for his car to come along? The road stretched ahead, endless and black, but Daniel's focus kept slipping to the edges of the highway. He couldn't shake the image of that crouching figure, pale and patient, waiting in the dark. And as he drove, he couldn't help but wonder, was it the only one? Every instinct told me to stay in bed, to pretend I hadn't heard anything at all. But something inside me pushed back. Curiosity mixed with a strange, gnawing dread. Against better judgment, I slid my legs off the bed and crept barefoot across the floor. The house seemed louder with every tiny sound I made, the creak of a floorboard, the soft rustle of my pajama pants. Each felt amplified, like the night was straining to listen. I hesitated at the bedroom door, heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and narrow, lit only by the faint glow of a nightlight plugged into the wall. The shadows seemed longer than usual, like they had grown teeth in the absence of real light. I forced myself forward, step by step. The living room window was just ahead. Even before I reached it, I felt the cold air seeping through the glass. That was wrong. The window should have been sealed tight. My pulse quickened. I stopped a few feet short and leaned just enough to see beyond the curtain. At first, nothing. Only the yard, the quiet street, the motionless cars. But then, movement. Subtle. Something standing between the street lamp and the edge of my driveway. My stomach dropped. There was no mistaking it. A figure, tall, thin, motionless. It didn't shift its weight, didn't fidget, didn't move naturally. It just stood there like a shadow cut out from the night itself. Though I couldn't see their face, I felt it. The stare, that crushing, invisible weight pressing against me. Whoever it was, they weren't just standing there randomly. They were looking directly into my house, directly at me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug. My chest tightened as I fought the urge to scream. Instead, I ducked low, crawling behind the couch. The window loomed above me, and I prayed that I hadn't been seen. Minutes dragged by like hours. I dared not peek again. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears and the faint buzz of the fridge in the kitchen. But I knew, just knew, that figure was still there. I stayed frozen behind the couch, listening to every creak and whisper of the house. The figure outside hadn't moved, not a step, not a twitch. It was as if the night itself had warped around it, holding it in place just to torment me. Eventually, I forced myself to inch toward the window again, careful to keep low. The glow of the street lamp barely reached the edge of the driveway, but there it was. The figure, closer now. It had shifted, subtly, stepping forward in a way that was almost too deliberate, almost impossible to see. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. My hands shook as I reached for the nearest object, anything that could act as a weapon. My phone, a kitchen knife, anything. But even as I armed myself, I felt a terrifying realization. It didn't matter what I had. This thing wasn't coming for a fight in the way I expected. It wasn't shouting, it wasn't attacking. It was patient, waiting, watching, and patience, I knew, could outlast anyone's courage. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding, trying to imagine the last time I had felt completely helpless. This was worse. This wasn't a storm. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the darkness itself was pushing in. Shadows pooled at the edges of the room, and I could almost feel them pressing against the window, against the walls, as though trying to merge with the figure outside. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but instinct kept me still, my mind paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of escaping. The figure stayed there, a pale, silent sentinel, holding some power that I couldn't comprehend, a quiet terror that demanded attention. And then, without warning, it raised an arm, not in anger, not in greeting, but just enough to let me know it had seen me. The cold wave of fear that hit me in that instant felt like ice crawling through my veins. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Whatever it was aware. And now I was part of its game. The moment the figure raised its arm, something inside me snapped. My fear morphed into a desperate need to act. I crept backward toward the bedroom, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the window. Every floorboard groaned beneath my weight, and each sound felt deafening. I pressed my ear to the bedroom door, listening. Outside, the night seemed impossibly still again, as if the figure had frozen in place just to watch me. My chest burned with the effort to breathe quietly, to slow the thudding of my heart. I glanced toward the window from the corner of my eye, just a sliver of light showing the figure's outline. It hadn't moved, but its presence felt closer, more tangible. It was no longer just outside. I could feel it pressing against the walls, against my space, against my sanity. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but my hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. The dial tone felt like an insult, mocking in its normalcy. The operator answered, calm and professional, but my voice came out strained and panicked. Someone is outside my house," I whispered. "Please, I don't know what to do." The operator's voice was steady, reassuring. "Stay on the line. Keep calm. We're sending someone." But even as she spoke, I felt it, the figure moving, just a step, a shift in shadow. My stomach dropped, and I realized with horror. It was no longer standing still. It was beginning to circle, testing, probing. Not fast, not loud, just deliberate and patient. I ducked lower behind the bed, praying the walls would hide me, praying it couldn't see me. But something primal told me that hiding might not be enough. Whatever it was, it knew I was here. It had seen me. And now it was deciding how to respond. The minutes dragged like hours. I could hear nothing but my own rapid breathing and the faint rustle of leaves brushing against the window outside. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to stay hidden, to survive. And in that tense, frozen moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about breaking in. This was about presence. It was about fear. And it had already won. I stayed crouched behind the bed, trying to slow my racing heartbeat, trying to convince myself that it might just leave. But deep down, I knew better. The night had changed. The air was charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Thick, heavy, suffocating. Suddenly, a faint creak echoed from the living room. Not loud, but deliberate, like the figure had shifted its weight. My stomach turned. It had moved. The shadow that had once stood still was now closer to the house. I swallowed hard, trying to control my breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, yet part of me wanted to see. I inched toward the bedroom door, peeking carefully into the hallway. The living room was dark, but there was a sense of presence. Something tall, impossibly still, lingering near the window. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but my legs refused to move. My mind spun, imagining the figure just outside, inching closer, testing the house. I could feel the tension press against my chest, each heartbeat louder than the last. Then I saw it. A pale hand, just the tip of a sleeve maybe, brush against the curtain. It wasn't trying to open the window, not yet. It was assessing, probing. It knew I was watching and it wasn't scared. I froze completely, paralyzed by the realization. This wasn't random, it wasn't a prank. Someone, or something, was deliberately here, and my presence was no surprise. The minutes stretched, heavy and unrelenting. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. I didn't dare move. The house felt like a fragile shell, barely containing the horror pressing against its walls. And all the while, that shadow lingered, testing me, daring me to make the first mistake. The silence was unbearable. Every second dragged, filled with a tension so thick it felt like it could choke me. I pressed myself flat against the wall, praying the figure outside couldn't sense me moving at all. Then a sudden tap echoed through the living room. Soft, deliberate. Not at the window this time, but from the front door. My stomach sank. It wasn't testing the windows anymore. It was checking every entrance, finding its way in. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands, glancing at the dial. My call to 911 was still connected, the operator's calm voice echoing in my ears, reminding me to stay on the line. I whispered, "It's at the door. I think it's trying to get in." The tap came again, this time louder, more insistent. It had a rhythm like a countdown or a warning. My mind raced. How could someone move with such precision, such patience? It was almost unnatural. I crawled toward the bedroom window, hoping for another exit, but the sight outside froze me in place. The figure had shifted closer to the driveway, staring upward, as if it could see through walls. Its presence wasn't just outside now, it was inside the perception of the house itself, turning every shadow into a threat. My heart pounded and my breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but there was nowhere safe. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Then came the softest scrape. Something moving along the side of the house, a sound so quiet it could have been the wind, yet I knew it wasn't. The figure was circling, deliberate, patient, unstoppable. I pressed my back against the wall, closing my eyes for a brief second. When I opened them, the room seemed darker, heavier. The figure outside wasn't just a shadow now. It was a force, an attention I couldn't ignore, and it was deciding when, or if, it would act. And in that moment I understood the cruelest truth. I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears as I stayed pressed against the bedroom wall. Every muscle in my body was taut, ready to spring, yet frozen in terror. The figure outside wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. Every movement it made was calculated, deliberate, like it knew exactly how to manipulate fear. Then came the sound that shattered the last remnants of my composure. The doorknob rattled. Not violently, but enough to let me know it was being tested. Slowly, carefully, someone was trying the door. My pulse shot into overdrive. I clutched the phone like a lifeline, whispering into it. "They're trying to get in. Please, someone help me." I could hear the operator's calm voice through the line, telling me to stay on the line, stay calm. But calm was impossible. The rattling stopped, then resumed, accompanied by a soft scraping sound, as if the figure's fingertips were brushing along the door's surface, testing for weakness. I wanted to scream, to bolt, to do anything, but my body refused. The terror rooted me in place. I could feel the presence pressing inward, threatening to cross the threshold into my sanctuary. Then a shadow passed under the door, stretching unnaturally long across the floor. I barely breathed, staring at the dark shape creeping closer, feeling the weight of its attention on me. My mind raced, imagining every scenario, every horrifying possibility. Minutes dragged into eternity. The scraping stopped, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible thump on the floorboards beyond the door. Something had entered the threshold of the house. I pressed myself flat against the wall, trying to make myself invisible, praying it wouldn't see me. And then came the softest whisper of movement, a deliberate, careful step that carried power and intent. The figure was inside my home, and the realization sent a wave of panic surging through me that I could hardly control. At that moment, I understood fully there was no escape, not yet, and whatever was in the house wasn't done. I stayed pressed against the wall, every nerve screaming. The figure had moved silently through the house, testing, observing, and yet it hadn't attacked. That in itself was terrifying. It was deliberate, patient, a presence that didn't need violence to terrify. Minutes, or maybe hours passed. Time lost meaning. Every small sound, every shift of shadow felt magnified. The figure lingered, not leaving, not retreating, almost as if it were part of the house itself. My imagination tried to fill the gaps, but I could feel it. This was real. Something had entered my space and refused to go. I didn't move. I didn't breathe louder than I had to. My phone lay on the bed, still connected to the operator, who reassured me repeatedly. But no reassurance could touch the weight pressing against the walls, the quiet gaze that followed every thought, every heartbeat. Eventually, I realized I was exhausted, but sleep was impossible. The figure's presence didn't fade, it remained, a shadow at the edge of perception. Even after the sun began to rise, even after the first weak light of morning spilled across the floor, I felt it. Watching. Waiting. When the police finally arrived, the house was empty. No sign of forced entry. No trace of the figure that had haunted the night. Yet I knew it hadn't left. It had only retreated into the corners of reality where fear resides. And that's the cruel truth. Some presences don't vanish even when the lights come on. They linger, patient, watching, waiting for the next night, the next person brave or foolish enough to cross their path. The night had ended, but the terror never truly did. And as the sun rose, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. The highway, the trees, the quiet streets. It was only the beginning, which brings us to the next story. It was a quiet night, the kind where even the wind seemed hesitant to move. Mark had been driving for hours, the headlights cutting through the pitch black of the country road ahead. The GPS displayed nothing but a thin, twisting line, guiding him through a landscape that felt entirely deserted. At first, the emptiness was comforting. No cars honking, no trucks rumbling past, no one to rush him. Just him, the road, and the occasional flicker of distant trees passing by. But soon that solitude began to feel oppressive. The long stretches of black asphalt seemed endless, each mile feeling heavier than the last. Then he saw her, a figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched in the classic hitchhiker pose. She looked young, maybe his age, and her clothes were dark, blending almost entirely into the night. He hesitated, heart thumping. Picking up a stranger at this hour wasn't smart. Every rational part of him screamed to drive past, but another stranger part, a part that sometimes ignored reason, urged him to stop. He slowed the car and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice quieter than he expected. The girl nodded, climbing in without a word. The car felt colder the instant she was inside, and Mark noticed the faint smell of damp earth clinging to her. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was unfamiliar, like something that had been standing in the night for far too long. He tried to make conversation, small talk, to break the tension. Where are you headed?" He glanced at her profile. She didn't answer immediately, just stared forward, expression blank. Finally, she murmured, "Just down the road." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, carrying an edge that made the hair on his neck rise. As the minutes passed, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The road behind him seemed too empty, the darkness too deep, the air inside the car too still. Every small sound, the hum of the tires, the faint rustle of fabric, her breathing, felt amplified. He tried to focus on the lines of the road, on the GPS, anything to ground himself. And then he realized something chilling. The girl hadn't blinked once since she got in. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, blank and unfeeling, as if she weren't entirely human, or as if she belonged to a place outside his reality. Mark swallowed hard. He didn't know why he had stopped, why he had let her in. But now, trapped in the small space of the car, with the dark stretching endlessly around them, he understood that some choices can't be undone once they're made. The miles stretched on, and the silence in the car became almost unbearable. Mark tried to fill it with small talk, asking about the town she was heading to, commenting on the weather, anything. But she didn't respond, not a word, not even a glance. Her eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, unblinking, unwavering, like she was staring into some invisible horizon only she could see. Mark felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Something about her presence was wrong. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way she moved, the way she seemed to absorb the light around her. Shadows clung to her, and even in the glow of the dashboard, her features looked distorted, stretched, almost unreal. He shifted in his seat, trying to adjust the mirror subtly, just to get a better view of her. The reflection sent a shiver down his spine. Her face, pale and expressionless, seemed almost too still. The kind of stillness that didn't belong to a living person. He wanted to speak again, to break the tension, but every word felt hollow. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, he muttered, "Are you cold? Do you want the heater on?" She tilted her head slightly, just enough for him to notice the faintest smile, almost imperceptible. But it didn't reach her eyes. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost detached, yet chilling. "I've been waiting for a ride, a long time." Mark's hands tightened on the wheel. Waiting? How long? And for what? He glanced at her, searching for a hint of humor or sarcasm, but there was none. Only that calm, empty gaze, watching him like a predator, observing prey. The road seemed darker than before. The trees on either side of the car leaned closer, shadows stretching across the hood, as if trying to reach in. Every instinct told him to turn around, to pull over, to do anything to escape. But he couldn't. Not yet. And then a new sensation crawled over him. A pressure, as if the air in the car had thickened, pressing against his chest, squeezing his lungs. He realized with growing horror that he wasn't alone in more ways than one. Something unseen was in the back seat with her, something that made the night feel alive and malevolent. Mark swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. The ride had only just begun, and already he could feel that he was no longer the one in control. Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the road seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. Every shadow along the roadside twisted unnaturally in his headlights, and the isolation pressed down on him like a physical weight. The silence in the car wasn't just unsettling anymore. It was oppressive, a living thing crawling over his nerves. He tried to focus on the road, on the lines glowing faintly under his tires, but every few seconds he caught movement in the corner of his eye. something flickering just outside, a shadow darting between the trees, almost like it was keeping pace with them. Glancing at the passenger, Mark noticed a subtle shift. She was staring directly ahead, yet there was a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Not sinister, exactly, but knowing. As if she was aware of something he wasn't. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tight. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, it was softly, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made him flinch. "You shouldn't be here." Mark's pulse spiked. He tried to laugh it off, a nervous chuckle, but the sound died in his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, though a part of him already knew he didn't want the answer. Her eyes met his in the rearview mirror. They weren't just pale anymore. They seemed too dark, endless, like looking into a void that had swallowed every light. "Some roads," she said, "should never be driven at night." Mark swallowed hard, glancing again at the road. Up ahead, the trees grew closer together, the road narrower, the darkness more complete. The GPS showed a simple line, but the terrain felt different, warped, unfamiliar, as if reality itself had shifted. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to turn back, to abandon the stranger and run. But he couldn't. Something invisible held him in place, a tension he couldn't explain. The car moved forward under his control, but every part of him felt trapped, caught in a web he couldn't see. Then, from the darkness beyond the windshield, a figure appeared briefly on the side of the road. Just a flash. A person? A shadow? Mark couldn't tell. And when he blinked, it was gone. Yet the dread didn't leave. It lingered, gnawing at him, growing heavier with every mile. And he realized with a sinking heart that the girl beside him wasn't just a passenger. She was part of the road now, part of the darkness. And whatever was out there, waiting, she knew it all along. The road stretched endlessly ahead, dark and twisting, as if it had been pulled straight from a nightmare. Mark's eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement in the trees behind him. The girl remained silent, her gaze fixed on the windshield, unblinking, almost unreadable. Then he noticed it, a flicker at the edge of the headlights, just beyond the ditch. At first, he thought it was an animal, but it moved too deliberately, too fluidly, almost gliding along the roadside. Mark swallowed hard, heart hammering. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice barely audible. She didn't respond. Her eyes didn't move. The silence was heavier than the shadows themselves. The flicker appeared again, closer now. A dark figure, tall, stretching unnaturally, keeping pace with the car despite no visible legs moving. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to look away, but his eyes were glued to the glowing headlights reflecting off its shape. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, hands sweating. Every instinct screamed at him to speed up, to escape the impossible presence shadowing his path. But the road was narrow, twisting, and the figure matched him at every turn, silent, patient, relentless. Mark stole another glance at the girl. The smirk had widened slightly, subtle but unmistakable. "They always follow the ones who stop for strangers," she whispered, as if reading his thoughts. The words cut through him like ice. A low wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a scent he couldn't place. Damp earth, decay, something old. The figure on the roadside didn't slow, it didn't falter. It simply kept moving, perfectly synchronized with the car, like a shadow that had stepped out of reality itself. Mark's pulse thundered, and he forced himself to focus on the road ahead. Each curve felt like a challenge, each mile a test. Yet he couldn't shake the knowledge. Whatever followed him wasn't just a person, it wasn't just a shadow. It was something older, something patient, and it had chosen him tonight. The silence returned, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the tires and the occasional rustle of leaves. But the dread clung to him, growing sharper with every heartbeat. He knew the night had only just begun, and the road ahead would be far darker than anything he had imagined. Mark's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. The trees seemed to close in around the road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the car. The headlights reflected off the asphalt, revealing the endless stretch ahead, but every shadow now seemed alive, twisting unnaturally. Then he saw it, a figure suddenly crossing the road ahead, not running, not walking, but gliding, impossibly smooth. Mark slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, the car skidding slightly as he tried to avoid it. But when he looked again, the figure was gone, just darkness swallowed by the night. His heart hammered in his chest. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice shaking. The girl beside him remained silent, expressionless. A faint, knowing smile tugged at the corners of her mouth like she expected this. Mark forced himself to keep moving, taking a deep breath. Every mile felt longer, every curve more dangerous. The road seemed endless, twisting, and the figure, or something like it, could appear at any moment. Suddenly, he felt it. The car's temperature dropped sharply, a cold wave washing over him from the back seat. He glanced over his shoulder. The girl hadn't moved, yet the shadows behind her seemed to shift, stretching unnaturally toward him. A whisper of wind rattled the windows, carrying a faint, unplaceable scent. Wet earth, decay, something ancient. Mark's stomach churned. He realized the danger wasn't just outside the car. It was inside too, lurking in the air around them. The figure appeared again in the distance, just beyond a curve. Mark's pulse surged as he saw it move in ways no human should, bending, stretching, gliding without effort. His instincts screamed to run, but the road offered no escape. The girl's voice broke the tense silence, calm and unsettling. "Most people don't make it past this stretch at night. But you might." The words sent chills down Mark's spine. She wasn't warning him. She was telling him a truth he hadn't known. The road had rules, and he was now playing by them. Mark tightened his grip on the wheel. Every second counted, every mile mattered, and he knew deep down that the night had only just begun, and the closer he got to the figure, the more impossible escape would become. Mark's nerves were stretched tight, every muscle in his body trembling. The road ahead twisted like a ribbon in the darkness, and every tree along the roadside seemed to lean closer, shadows spilling across the asphalt as if trying to reach him. Then he noticed movement in the rearview mirror, a shape following them. At first, he thought it was a trick of the headlights, but it moved with purpose, gliding silently over the road, keeping perfect pace. His pulse raced. The figure was closer now, closer than it had any right to be. The girl in the passenger seat remained silent, her eyes fixed ahead, but the faint smirk never left her face. She seemed to anticipate every twist and turn, as if she were part of the darkness chasing them. Mark's stomach churned. He wished she would speak, wished she would warn him, but instead the air grew colder, heavier, suffocating in its intensity. The figure surged forward, closer still. The headlights reflected off it in strange, unnatural ways. It wasn't just a shadow. Its shape seemed distorted, stretching and bending as though reality itself was being manipulated. Mark gripped the wheel, hands slick with sweat, trying to maintain control as the car felt heavier, slower, trapped on the cursed road. Suddenly, a low, guttural sound echoed from behind. Not a growl, not a voice, but something in between. A sound that vibrated through the car, through Mark's bones. He swallowed hard, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The girl finally spoke, her voice calm, chilling. "It doesn't like being ignored." The words sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't a warning, it was a statement of fact. The darkness, the figure, the road, all of it had rules, and they were now bound by them. Mark tried to focus on the road, but the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, stretching longer, reaching further, creeping along the edges of his vision. The figure was no longer just behind them. It was everywhere at once, its presence pressing into the car, into his mind, into every corner of his awareness. He realized then, with a surge of panic, that the road wasn't just haunted by the figure outside. It was alive, aware, and he was no longer the driver. He was the prey. Mark's hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly. Every muscle in his body was tense, every nerve screaming that something was wrong. Far more wrong than any night drive should be. The shadows along the road seemed alive, twisting and writhing at the edges of his vision, bending in ways that defied reason. The figure was closer than ever now, not rushing, not attacking outright, but moving with a deliberate, patient precision that made Mark's skin crawl. It seemed to anticipate his every turn, every break, every attempt to distance himself. He stole a glance at the passenger. The girl remained calm, almost eerily serene, as if she belonged to this night and to the road itself. "You shouldn't fight it," she whispered, her voice a soft rasp that seemed to echo inside his skull. "It doesn't like to be resisted." Mark's stomach twisted. What did that mean? How could he not resist something that was following him, something that felt almost supernatural in its presence? He tried to reason with himself, tried to convince himself it was a prank, a trick of the shadows, but the evidence was undeniable. The air inside the car had grown colder, heavier, oppressive. Mark shivered, realizing the temperature wasn't just from the night outside. It was from the figure, from the unseen force it carried with it, pressing inward, attempting to control him, control the car, control the road. He pressed forward, trying to focus on the lines of the asphalt, trying to ignore the dread gnawing at his mind. But the figure matched every move, every swerve, gliding as though the laws of physics didn't apply. Then the headlights flickered, briefly plunging the car into darkness. In that instant, Mark felt it, a presence in the back seat, a weight that hadn't been there before, as though the shadows themselves had entered the car. He gasped, eyes wide, heart pounding. The girl said nothing, only gave that faint, knowing smile. And Mark realized with growing horror that the figure outside was only part of the nightmare. The real terror had already found its way inside. Mark's grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, knuckles aching as the car swerved slightly around another bend. The night seemed to press in from all sides, trees looming like dark sentinels, and the road ahead narrowing into a tunnel of shadows. He dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The figure was closer now, gliding effortlessly along the road, moving faster than any human could, its form shifting and stretching in ways that made his stomach twist. It wasn't just following, it was tracking, anticipating every turn. The girl beside him remained silent, calm, but her presence had become almost a tether to the darkness itself. She leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on the road, and whispered, "It knows your fear. It feeds on it." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He tried to focus, tried to tell himself it was just a shadow, just an overactive imagination, but he could feel it. The pressure in the air, the almost tangible presence creeping into the car, twisting the very space around him. Then, movement in the trees caught his eye. Another figure? Or the same one, splitting, duplicating in the darkness? Mark couldn't tell. The road ahead curved sharply, and he had to brake hard, tires screeching, sending gravel scattering into the void. A low whisper carried from the back seat. Barely audible, yet it made the hair on his neck stand on end. Mark froze, realizing the voice was inside the car. Not the girl's, not human. Something else. Something old. Something patient. He swallowed hard and forced his eyes on the road, yet every shadow, every flicker of light seemed to twist into forms that weren't meant to exist. The figure outside wasn't just a threat anymore. It was everywhere. It was the road, the air, the trees, the darkness itself. Mark realized he couldn't outrun it. The only thing he could do was survive, mile by mile, heartbeat by heartbeat, and hope that the night didn't claim him before the road ended. Mark's chest burned as he gripped the wheel tighter, every nerve screaming that he was no longer alone. The shadows along the road seemed alive, twisting unnaturally, stretching toward the car as if trying to merge with it. Then he saw it, fully. The figure stepped onto the road ahead, impossibly tall, its outline flickering and stretching, almost like it existed partly in another dimension. Mark slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, but even in the sudden stop, the road didn't feel safe. The headlights revealed something worse. Multiple shadows now flitting along the edges of the trees, keeping pace, converging. They weren't just figures anymore, they were extensions of the darkness itself, feeding on fear, surrounding the car, hemming him in. The girl beside him remained calm, almost unnervingly so. "It wants to scare you. It wants you to panic," she whispered. "Don't give it the satisfaction." Her voice was soft, but every word cut through the tension like a knife. Mark's eyes darted between the road, the rear-view mirror, and the shadows beyond. Every instinct screamed to move, to escape, but the road was narrow, twisting, and the figures outside anticipated every motion. Then the air inside the car grew impossibly cold, a pressure pressing down on his chest. Something unseen shifted behind him. Not human, not girl. Something older, something patient, waiting for the perfect moment. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep moving, to focus on the wheel, on the faint line of asphalt glowing under the headlights. But each second, each mile felt like walking further into a trap, carefully laid by the night itself. The shadows pressed closer, not attacking yet, just surrounding, filling every space with tension and dread. Mark realized with a cold certainty that this wasn't a chase he could outrun. This was a confrontation of will, a test of fear, and the night had already won half the battle. Mark's hands ached, his knuckles white from the relentless grip on the wheel. The highway ahead finally showed the faint glow of streetlights, the edges of civilization slowly creeping in. Relief surged through him, but it was fragile, tinged with unease. The shadows that had stalked him all night seemed to hesitate at the roadside, lingering just beyond the reach of the headlights. He exhaled shakily, forcing himself to focus on the asphalt glowing under the tires, aware that the night wasn't quite done with him yet. The girl beside him, or what he thought was beside him, remained eerily silent. Her presence had been subtle, guiding, almost teasing, yet comforting in its strange way. "Some roads never let you leave," she whispered, barely audible over the hum of the engine. "But you might make it tonight." Mark swallowed hard, heart still hammering. Every rustle in the trees, every flicker in the shadows reminded him of the figures he had seen, the footsteps that had followed, and the suffocating pressure that had hung over the road like a living thing. He realized he hadn't just been driving. He had been part of a test, a trial designed by the night itself. The highway stretched on, dark and twisting, but as the first signs of a town appeared, faint lights, a hint of paved streets beyond the forest, the oppressive feeling began to lift. The figures, the shadows, the whispers of unseen footsteps, all receded, leaving only the memory, heavy and persistent. Mark exhaled deeply, a trembling laugh escaping as he realized he had survived. The night's ordeal had ended, but the memory of the chase, the unrelenting darkness, and the presence of that girl would stay with him long after the lights of the town swallowed the highway. As the road finally led him into safety, he couldn't shake the sense that the night had more stories to tell, more roads to test, more drivers to haunt. And somewhere beyond the trees and shadows, another tale awaited, a new journey, another brush with the unknown, another story ready to unfold. With that lingering unease, Mark's story ended, and the stage was set for Story 3, The Fading Summer, where new fears would rise under the cover of night and shadows. Alex had always loved summer, the long golden evenings, the smell of grass, the distant laughter of friends around the lake. But this summer felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a subtle tension that none of the carefree days before had carried. He drove down the narrow forest road, windows down, the warm breeze carrying the scent of pine and fading sunlight. Everything seemed ordinary at first, almost idyllic, until the shadows began to stretch in ways that felt unnatural, bending and twisting where they shouldn't. The campsite was quiet, eerily so, with the tent standing empty and the campfire long cold. Alex felt a strange awareness in the stillness, a sense that the woods themselves were watching, patient and patient, waiting. As he unpacked his things, he noticed movements in the periphery. Small flashes, glimpses of figures darting between the trees. He blinked, and they were gone. His pulse quickened. Was it imagination or something else lurking just beyond the light? The forest seemed alive, every rustle and whisper amplified in the quiet. Alex's footsteps crunched against the dirt, echoing in the heavy stillness. The birds had gone quiet, and even the wind seemed hesitant, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible hum. He glanced back at the path he had driven in on. Darkness pressed at its edges, folding the familiar into something alien. Alex swallowed hard, feeling that mix of excitement and dread, the same feeling that made summer nights memorable, but this time it carried an edge sharper than he had ever known. The lake reflected the fading sunlight, glassy and still, but the shadows along its edge seemed too deep, almost liquid, hiding shapes that didn't belong. Every glance brought a shiver, a sense that someone, or something, was observing from just beyond the light. Alex exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. He reminded himself that it was the end of summer, that the forest was full of tricks and imagination. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted, and it would grow with the coming night. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped lower, and the feeling of being watched persisted. Alex knew that whatever had begun this summer night wasn't over yet, and the woods were only just revealing the first whispers of their secrets. As dusk settled, the forest seemed to come alive in ways Alex hadn't noticed before. Shadows stretched longer, twisting unnaturally between the trunks. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sounded louder than it should, sharper, deliberate, as if the woods themselves were speaking. Alex moved cautiously toward the lake, flashlight in hand. Its beam cut a narrow path through the deepening darkness, revealing nothing but the familiar shapes of trees and rocks. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something watched from the edges of the light. A whisper drifted through the air. Faint, almost imperceptible, like the wind carrying a message meant only for him. He froze, straining to catch the sound, heart pounding. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was out there, just beyond the circle of light. The rustling grew closer. Not random, patterned, measured. Alex's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the campsite, but curiosity and fear kept him moving forward, step by cautious step. He glanced over his shoulder. The path he had taken earlier now looked different, darker, less familiar. The trees leaned in, shadows merging, twisting, forming shapes that his mind tried and failed to recognize. The whispers seemed to follow him, low murmurs that didn't make sense but carried intent, patient and calculating. The lake, once serene and reflective, now mirrored the darkness behind him. Ripples disturbed its surface, though no wind blew. And in the distance, he thought he saw a figure, fleeting, barely there, just beyond the tree line. A silhouette that vanished the moment he blinked. Alex swallowed hard, trying to calm his racing heartbeat. The forest wasn't just quiet anymore, it was alive, waiting, watching, testing him, measuring his courage, his resolve, his very presence in its territory. Every step toward the campsite felt like moving deeper into a web. The whispers grew louder, sharper, just out of understanding. Alex realized he wasn't exploring the woods. The woods were exploring him. With the sun fully gone and the night pressing in, Alex's awareness heightened. The campfire's glow, distant and small, seemed like the only anchor to safety. Yet he knew reaching it wouldn't be easy. Something unseen was moving with him, patient, relentless, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Alex's flashlight flickered as he moved closer to the campsite, the beam cutting through the thickening darkness, but revealing little. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching unnaturally, bending in ways that made the familiar feel alien. Then he saw it. A figure, fleeting and indistinct, standing at the edge of the tree line. It didn't move like a person, but it wasn't entirely still either. The way it shifted against the darkness made Alex's chest tighten, heart hammering. He swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to run, but something rooted him in place, a combination of dread and fascination that he couldn't shake. The figure's presence was palpable, a weight pressing against him from the shadows. The rustling of leaves grew louder, echoing unnaturally in the still night. Alex's mind raced. Maybe it was an animal, but the way the figure lingered, patient and deliberate, wasn't natural. Its form seemed to distort, folding into the darkness, yet always visible enough to remind him it was watching. He called out softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Hello?" No response. Only the faint murmur of the trees swaying and the distant sound of water lapping at the lake. Then, movement. Quick, subtle, but unmistakable. The figure was closer now, yet when Alex blinked, it seemed farther away again. His pulse surged. This wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. It was intelligent, deliberate, aware of him, studying him, waiting for him to react. Alex's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. He realized the forest had changed, the familiar campsite, the serene lake, even the backroads leading here. All had become part of a trap, a stage for the unknown. The figure was no longer just in the distance. It had chosen him. Every step he took toward the campfire felt measured, deliberate. Every snap of a twig underfoot echoed unnaturally, as though the forest itself were amplifying his fear. The presence pressed in closer, patient, testing the limits of his courage, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. Alex forced himself forward, eyes scanning the edges of the light, heart hammering in his chest. The figure was still there, waiting, patient, inevitable. And deep down he understood this night wasn't just a summer evening, it was the beginning of something far more terrifying. Alex's steps toward the campfire were slow, careful, every movement deliberate. The forest around him seemed to respond, shadows stretching and twisting, bending toward him like long fingers, trying to grasp at his ankles. The trees loomed taller, darker, each one a silent sentinel of the night. The whispers from earlier returned, faint at first, then growing in intensity. They weren't words he could understand, just a low, almost musical murmur that vibrated through the air and seemed to echo inside his skull. The sound made his teeth chatter, his stomach knot, yet he forced himself to move forward. A sudden rustle to his left made him spin, flashlight sweeping the dark foliage. Nothing. Yet the unease didn't fade. The shadows themselves seemed alive, moving in tandem, closing in, as though the forest had a heartbeat synchronized with his own. Every crack of a twig underfoot sent him flinching, expecting the figure to appear closer, faster, more threatening. But it didn't. Instead, it waited, patient, calculated, the tension building like a coiled spring in the night air. Alex's gaze fell on the lake. The water, once reflective and serene, now seemed dark and alive, mirroring the shadows of the trees in impossible shapes. Ripples appeared without cause, and for a moment he thought he saw a figure moving just beneath the surface before it vanished, leaving only the distorted reflection of the moon. The air grew colder, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something metallic, sharp. His breath came out in visible puffs, and a shiver ran down his spine. The forest wasn't just around him anymore. It pressed in, heavy and alive, observing every movement, every decision. Alex forced himself to take another step. The campfire glowed faintly ahead, a small island of light in the encroaching darkness. Yet even the fire's warmth couldn't push back the tension. Every shadow at its edge quivered, as if waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He realized that tonight the forest had its own rules. The light, the sound, even the air carried purpose. He wasn't just moving through it, he was part of it. And the longer he stayed, the more it would shape his fear, patience, and resolve. Alex's pulse raced as he forced himself forward. The forest had tightened its grip, and the night was ready to reveal the next layer of terror. Alex's heart pounded as he neared the campfire. The warmth of the fading flames should have offered comfort, but instead it only highlighted the darkness beyond, where shadows twisted unnaturally, and every tree seemed to lean toward him. The figure returned, more distinct now, lingering at the edge of the forest. It didn't move like a human. Its steps were silent, almost gliding over the undergrowth. Yet its presence pressed in like a physical weight, cold and unyielding, making every breath shallow and hurried. Alex froze, flashlight beam trembling in his grip. He wanted to call out, to ask if anyone was there, but the sound of his own voice seemed impossible, swallowed instantly by the thick night air. The figure didn't respond, yet its awareness was undeniable. It watched, patient, measuring, studying him. A rustle in the trees to his left made him spin, beam sweeping rapidly. Nothing. Yet instinct screamed it was closer, just beyond sight, hiding in plain darkness. Every nerve in his body tightened. The forest wasn't just alive. It was aware, and it had chosen to make its presence known. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. They weren't words, but thoughts, pressing into his mind, echoing with intent. Alex felt panic rise, but he forced himself to move forward, step by cautious step, toward the faint promise of safety in the campfire glow. The figure shifted slightly, gliding closer to the edge of the light. Its form flickered, bending in ways impossible for any human, and Alex realized with mounting dread that he was being studied. This wasn't random, it was deliberate. The forest, the figure, the shadows, all of it conspired to test his courage, his resolve, his very presence. A cold breeze swept past, carrying a faint metallic scent and a whisper that felt directed at him. Alex swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter. Every instinct screamed to flee, but his curiosity, mixed with fear, anchored him in place. The figure drew nearer, yet remained just beyond the light. Alex could feel its intent pressing down, heavy and undeniable, as though the night itself had taken form and chosen him for this encounter. He exhaled shakily, pulse hammering, and realized the forest was no longer a place of summer nostalgia. It had transformed into a realm of patience and suspense, where shadows had life, and the figure had all the time in the world to reveal its purpose. Alex took another tentative step forward, knowing that whatever came next would define this night. A night that would stay with him long after the fire burned out and the forest returned to silence. Alex felt every muscle in his body tense as the shadows seemed to grow thicker, closing in from all sides. The forest no longer felt like a familiar place. It was alive, aware and patient, a living entity that watched his every movement. The figure at the edge of the trees shifted again, gliding closer with an unnatural grace. Its form flickered at the edge of the flashlight beam, as though it existed both in and out of the world, impossible to fully comprehend. Alex's pulse hammered, echoing in his ears louder than the whispering wind. Every snap of a twig sounded deliberate, every rustle of leaves orchestrated to unnerve him. He tried to steady his breathing, forcing himself forward, yet each step felt like a battle against the unseen forces around him. The campfire's glow seemed weaker now, a fragile circle of safety barely holding back the encroaching darkness. The figure remained just beyond the light, patient, deliberate, testing him, measuring his fear. Alex realized the forest wasn't just surrounding him, it was part of the figure's presence, bending reality to its will. A sudden movement to his left made him spin. The shadows there rippled unnaturally, folding in ways that should have been impossible. Alex swallowed hard, heart hammering, realizing that the figure was more than a simple shape. It was an extension of the forest itself, patient, eternal, and intent. The whispers rose again, insistent and pressing, filling the space inside his mind. He couldn't distinguish the sound from thought. It was a constant, unnerving pressure that made his skin crawl and his chest tighten. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet he couldn't look away, couldn't stop moving forward. The forest had him, and the figure had him, and every step he took felt like walking deeper into a trap that had been set long before his arrival. Alex exhaled shakily, eyes scanning the shifting shadows, pulse racing. The night pressed on him, heavy and suffocating, and he realized with dawning horror that the encounter was far from over. The forest was patient, but it was also relentless, and it had all the time in the world. Alex's steps slowed as the figure drew closer, its presence impossible to ignore. The shadows shifted unnaturally with each movement, bending and twisting like liquid, as if the forest itself had taken shape to follow him. The figure's outline became clearer now, flickering at the edge of the flashlight's beam. It didn't walk like a human, didn't run or stumble. It glided, smooth and deliberate, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the campsite. Alex's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig felt magnified, as if the forest amplified his fear for its own twisted amusement. He could feel the figure's attention on him, patient, calculated, aware of every heartbeat. A cold breeze swept past, carrying a faint metallic scent and the low, whispering sound that seemed directed at him. Alex shivered, gripping the flashlight tighter. The figure wasn't just moving closer, it was testing him, measuring his courage, his fear, his very presence in the forest. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure's silence was deafening, heavy with intent. Each flicker at the edge of the light made his pulse race, and he realized he could not escape its gaze, no matter which direction he turned. The campfire, once a beacon of safety, now seemed fragile, almost pitiful, against the growing pressure of the darkness. Shadows stretched toward him, and the figure moved with them, a silent, relentless force that refused to be ignored. Alex's mind raced. This wasn't a random encounter. The forest had chosen him, the figure had chosen him, and now the night would force him to confront what he had sensed all along. He was not alone, and the forest was very much alive. Every step he took forward was tentative, measured, but necessary. The figure mirrored his movements, gliding closer with a patient persistence that made his stomach churn. He understood that this confrontation, subtle as it seemed, would shape the rest of the night. Alex exhaled shakily, pulse hammering, flashlight trembling in his hand. The figure waited, unwavering, patient, and he knew with certainty that the forest had already won, if not in control, then at least in intent. Alex's pulse raced as he edged closer to the campfire, each step deliberate yet heavy with dread. The forest pressed in from all sides, shadows stretching unnaturally, bending toward him as if the trees themselves were leaning to observe. The figure at the edge of the wood stepped forward, moving closer to the circle of firelight. It didn't run, didn't stumble, it glided, almost effortlessly, each movement precise and deliberate. The air around it seemed colder, heavier, charged with something Alex couldn't name. A low whisper drifted through the trees just beyond understanding. It wasn't a voice he could identify, yet its presence pressed directly into his mind, insistent and patient. Alex swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tighter, every muscle tense and ready to flee, though he knew running would do nothing. The figure's form flickered, bending the shadows around it, blending with the darkness and light in ways that defied reason. Alex could feel its intent, a silent awareness that made his skin crawl. It wasn't threatening outright, not yet, but the patience behind it carried a weight heavier than fear alone. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet his feet moved forward, driven by a mixture of curiosity and survival instinct. The forest itself seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, the shadows wrapping around him like a living thing. The campfire's glow wavered, flickering as though struggling against the presence pressing in. Alex could feel the figure studying him, waiting for him to react, to falter, to show the smallest sign of weakness. The pressure in the air thickened, almost tactile, pressing against his chest and jaw. He exhaled shakily, heartbeat hammering, realizing that this moment was inevitable. The forest had orchestrated it, the figure had chosen it, and he could not escape the awareness of its gaze. Every movement he made was mirrored in the shadows, every breath measured, every step counted. Alex's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he saw, what he felt. The forest had become a living trap, and the figure was its enforcer, patient, deliberate, and unstoppable. As the figure glided closer, the shadows merging with it, Alex understood one undeniable truth. This was not the end, but the culmination of the night's relentless tension. The direct confrontation had begun, and there was no turning back. Alex's chest tightened as he faced the figure, every nerve screaming. The forest around him had grown impossibly dark, shadows melting together, bending, reaching like living things. The campfire's light flickered weakly, barely keeping the encroaching darkness at bay. The figure's movements were deliberate, gliding closer, almost folding the night around itself. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears, each beat echoing like a drum, counting down toward an unknown climax. He could feel the tension, thick and heavy, pressing on his shoulders, tightening his chest. Every rustle of leaves, every subtle shift of shadow seemed amplified. The whispers returned, insistent, patient, threading into his thoughts, echoing the figure's silent intent. It wasn't just watching, it was shaping the night around him, bending time, space, and perception to its will. Alex's hands trembled, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. He wanted to run, to flee into the darkness of the familiar woods, but the forest itself seemed to resist him, twisting paths, elongating distances, making escape impossible. The figure drew closer, a dark silhouette that flickered at the edges of perception, its presence pressed on him, patient, deliberate, almost sentient. Alex realized that every second he had spent in the forest had been a test of courage, of will, of endurance against an entity that existed beyond reason. A cold wind swept through, carrying whispers that felt directed at him, pressing on his mind. Alex shivered, forced his legs to move, and in the midst of the suffocating tension, he understood something vital. The forest had not trapped him. It had revealed him, tested him, and now it would let him see its purpose. With one final, deliberate step, Alex closed the distance toward the campfire, the figure moving in tandem, an unstoppable presence. The night had reached its apex, the fear and suspense coiled tight, ready to unravel in the final moments. Alex's pulse hammered, breath shallow, every sense sharpened, as he faced the culmination of the night's relentless tension. The shadows, the figure, and the forest waited, patient, deliberate, eternal. The last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the campground in streaks of orange and deepening shadows. The laughter from earlier days had faded, leaving only the quiet whispers of the forest, rustling leaves, and the distant hum of cicadas. Every step felt heavier now, as if the air itself resisted movement. Alex walked slowly toward the cabin, heart still pounding from the events that had unfolded that night. The lake lay still, dark and glassy, reflecting a sky that seemed almost too wide, too empty. The memory of footsteps in the woods, the faint glimpses of shadowy figures, and the unnatural sounds that had kept everyone awake lingered in his mind like a cold weight. He paused at the edge of the clearing, glancing back at the tents, empty now, ghosts of the night's chaos. Every rustle made him flinch. The wind carried faint whispers, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen still watched from the trees, patient, waiting. Inside the cabin, the others were quiet, processing the night in their own ways. Some sat in stunned silence, others clutched mugs of warm drinks, but all shared the same unspoken realization. The woods had changed. Summer had ended, but the memory of what had happened would linger far longer. Alex stepped to the window, looking at the fading trail of the day. The forest seemed calm again, almost serene, but the events of the night had left an indelible mark. Shadows had moved in ways they shouldn't have. Sounds had echoed without source, and fear had visited without invitation. He exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the tension, but even as he turned away, he felt it. A subtle awareness at the edge of perception, something that had watched, waited, and disappeared only temporarily. It wasn't gone, it never truly was. As night fully claimed the sky, Alex realized something unsettling. Summer had ended, but the fear it left behind would remain quietly in the corners of memory, in the lingering silence of empty cabins, and in the shadows that no longer needed to move to terrify. And with that, the stage was set for another tale, another story of dread on the road, waiting just beyond the edge of the familiar. It was late, the kind of night where the road seemed endless, stretching like a ribbon into darkness. Emma drove cautiously, headlights cutting through the thick black, illuminating nothing but the occasional roadside sign and the skeletal outlines of trees swaying in the wind. The highway was empty, eerily silent, as if the world had vanished around her. At first, the solitude was comforting. No other cars, no lights in the distance, just her, the engine hum, and the faint sound of the tires rolling over asphalt. But as the minutes passed, the emptiness began to feel oppressive. Every curve, every shadow at the edge of her headlights made her stomach tighten. Then she saw it. A figure standing at the roadside, arms at its sides, motionless. Emma slowed the car instinctively, heart hammering. The figure didn't move as she approached. Its presence was unnatural, rigid, almost too still to be human. She debated whether to stop or keep driving, mind racing with a mix of fear and curiosity. Her rational side screamed not to stop, not to pick up a stranger. Yet something made her slow to a crawl, just enough to get a better look. The figure's face was obscured by darkness, but she felt eyes on her, piercing, deliberate, and unrelenting. Emma swallowed hard, her hands gripping the wheel tighter. Every instinct urged her to leave, to escape the desolate stretch of road, but the figure remained, frozen in place, yet somehow moving with her as she drove past. It wasn't just standing there. It was tracking her, patient, deliberate, a shadow tethered to her car. The highway seemed to stretch further, longer than any map could show, twisting unnaturally, and the night pressed closer with every mile. Emma's pulse quickened, every sound amplified. The hum of the engine, the whisper of wind through the open window, the faint rustle of leaves. She realized with a creeping dread that she wasn't just on a quiet highway. She was somewhere else now, somewhere that obeyed rules she didn't understand. The figure wasn't random. The shadows weren't incidental. The night itself had intentions, and she was caught in its path. The tension in the car was palpable, thickening with every passing second. Emma glanced at the passenger seat. Empty, yet the feeling of presence lingered, as if the car itself had become a vessel for the unseen. With the road stretching ahead and the figure keeping pace behind, Emma understood one terrifying truth. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun, and the highway was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Emma's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the dark highway stretched on. The figure she had seen moments ago was still there, standing at the roadside, eerily still yet somehow keeping pace with her as she drove. Her pulse raced, every nerve screaming that something was wrong. The silence around her was oppressive. No other cars, no distant lights, just the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the faint whisper of wind through the partially open window. Each sound felt magnified, unnatural, as if the night itself were listening. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure's outline remained visible, frozen in place, yet hauntingly persistent. It didn't blink, didn't move like a normal person. It simply watched, and that gaze alone made her stomach tighten with fear. Emma tried to rationalize what she was seeing. A hitchhiker, frozen in the night, someone playing a cruel prank. But every instinct in her body screamed that this was something else entirely. Something patient. Something that didn't belong to the rules of reality. The air inside the car grew heavier, colder. Her breath fogged the windshield as she exhaled sharply. Every mile seemed to stretch longer than the last, the road curving unnaturally, as if it were alive and reshaping itself around her journey. Then came the faint sound of footsteps behind the car, soft at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder with each passing second. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. She glanced around frantically. Nothing. Only the darkness pressing in from all sides and the figure that refused to leave the roadside. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus on the wheel, to keep her eyes on the road. But a creeping realization settled over her. This was no ordinary night, and the figure was no ordinary person. It was waiting, patient, unyielding, testing her resolve, feeding on her fear. Emma's knuckles whitened. The road had become a trap, the darkness a predator, and she was running out of options. The persistent shadow behind her wasn't going away, and she couldn't turn around. The highway stretched infinitely, twisting, bending and swallowing everything familiar. The figure's presence was suffocating, inescapable. Every instinct urged her to flee, but Emma realized with chilling clarity the night was winning, and the chase had only just begun. Emma's eyes were glued to the road, but the tension in the car made it impossible to ignore the feeling of being watched. Every curve revealed the same eerie figure at the roadside, still standing perfectly still, its gaze fixed on her like it could see into her very thoughts. Then it happened. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement closer than before, something darting between the trees, just beyond the edge of her headlights. Not quite human, too fluid, too fast. It moved in unnatural bursts, appearing and disappearing, as if the night itself were folding around her. Emma gasped, gripping the wheel so tightly her fingers ached. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she forced herself to keep driving, but the figure at the roadside didn't budge. It remained, patient, waiting. Her instincts screamed to flee, to slam on the gas, but the road twisted unnaturally, each bend bringing her back closer to the figure, no matter how fast she went. The air in the car had grown colder, and a faint scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, almost like blood, lingered around her. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She wasn't just alone on the highway, she was being hunted. A whisper seemed to drift from the back seat, faint, almost inaudible, yet undeniably there. Emma froze. The car was empty behind her, no one. Yet the sensation of presence pressed in, suffocating, cold and heavy. The figure stepped slightly onto the road as she passed, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the asphalt. Emma's breath caught, heart pounding. It didn't move fast, but it didn't need to. The menace wasn't in speed, it was in inevitability. As the car continued down the highway, the figure followed with unrelenting patience, every movement calculated, every step designed to erode her courage. Emma realized then, with a creeping dread, that this encounter wasn't accidental. It had been waiting for her, for this night. Emma's pulse raced as the figure stayed at the roadside, its presence almost palpable, pressing against her mind as much as her senses. The highway stretched on endlessly, the asphalt glinting faintly under her headlights, yet every bend seemed to lead her back toward the figure. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, as shadows seemed to twist and bend unnaturally around the car. Every movement of the trees, every flicker in her peripheral vision felt deliberate, calculated. It was no longer a simple hitchhiker or a prank. It was something that belonged to the night, something that didn't need to move to terrify. Emma's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The darkness behind her was dense, oppressive, yet she thought she saw shapes moving. Flashes, distortions, like shadows that weren't supposed to be. Every nerve in her body screamed that she was not alone. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying faint, almost indistinguishable whispers. Emma couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. The night had noticed her, and it was patient. It would wait for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to close the distance. She tried to focus on the road ahead, on the lines glowing faintly under the tires, but the figure at the roadside seemed to follow every move. It didn't run, it didn't chase, it simply was, and its presence was enough to make her heart pound in her chest. The air inside the car grew colder, heavier. Emma felt a pressure against her chest, a suffocating weight that had nothing to do with the seatbelt or the tires on the asphalt. She exhaled sharply, realizing the pursuit wasn't just outside, it had entered her space, creeping into her mind. Every instinct screamed to escape, yet the road seemed endless, looping, twisting, trapping her within a corridor of shadows. Emma understood with chilling clarity. This night wasn't over, and the highway had its rules. And as the figure continued to watch, unmoving yet threatening, Emma knew that the next mile could decide everything. The pursuit had only just begun, and the night was patient. Emma's heart pounded, her knuckles aching from gripping the wheel so tightly. The highway twisted ahead like a black ribbon, the shadows of the trees reaching toward her car as if trying to pull her into the darkness. Suddenly, movement caught her eye, something darting across the road ahead, not walking, not running, but gliding, fluid and unnatural. Emma slammed on the brakes, tires screeching, the car skidding slightly. For a moment, nothing was there. The road was empty, silent. But she knew better. Glancing in the rearview mirror, her pulse skipped a beat. The figure was closer now, still at the roadside, yet somehow moving with her. Its presence pressed into her, heavy, suffocating, and inescapable. She realized this wasn't just a person. It was something else, something patient, something that didn't belong to the world she knew. The wind howled through the trees, carrying faint whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Emma's chest tightened. The night had become a living thing, a predator that watched, waited, and tested her courage. She swallowed hard and pressed on, trying to steady her breathing. But with every mile, the shadows seemed to grow, to creep closer, stretching unnaturally, as if the darkness itself had a heartbeat synchronized with hers. The figure moved again, gliding onto the road's edge, closer this time. Emma's stomach churned. She wanted to escape, but the highway twisted in ways that disoriented her. Each bend brought her closer to the unknown, and she could feel the presence lurking in the corners of her vision, patient and relentless. Her pulse thundered, breath shallow. She realized the highway wasn't just a road tonight. It was a test, a trap, and the figure wasn't just waiting. It was guiding her, pushing her towards something she didn't yet understand. Emma forced herself to focus on the headlights illuminating the asphalt, the faint lines guiding her forward. But deep down, she knew the night had already claimed its place in her mind, and the closer she drove to the figure, the more inescapable it became. Emma felt a chill creep over her as the highway stretched endlessly ahead. The figure at the roadside remained, unwavering, yet somehow closer than before, its presence pressing against her chest like an invisible weight. The air inside the car had grown colder, thick, and heavy, making every breath feel strained. Emma's hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly, but she couldn't let go. The road demanded her attention, and the shadows demanded her fear. The trees along the roadside seemed to bend inward, their branches stretching unnaturally toward the headlights. Each flicker of movement in the corner of her eye made her heart skip, but when she turned to look, nothing was there. Only darkness, waiting. A whisper seemed to float through the car, soft, unintelligible, yet unmistakably there. Emma froze. She glanced to the back seat, empty. Yet the feeling of being watched, of a presence lingering, suffocated her. It was patient, deliberate, and utterly unyielding. Her pulse raced as she realized the figure outside wasn't acting like a human. It didn't chase, didn't run. It simply existed, an extension of the night itself, and the darkness had begun to creep into her space, blending the world inside and outside the car. Emma tried to focus, eyes locked on the road, tires tracing the faint lines of the asphalt. But the pressure grew heavier, like the night was testing her, waiting for a mistake, waiting for her fear to take control. The figure moved subtly, gliding closer to the edge of the road, maintaining perfect distance, its presence amplified by the unnatural stillness of the night. Emma could feel it in her bones, a tension that made the car feel smaller, the highway narrower, the air thicker. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself to keep driving, but she understood one thing clearly. This night wasn't just a road, it was a force. And every mile she traveled, every turn she took, was part of the test. Emma's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The darkness had weight, presence, and intent. And the figure waiting at the roadside was the embodiment of both. Emma's hands were stiff, knuckles white from the relentless grip on the wheel. The highway twisted ahead, shadows stretching unnaturally along the asphalt, pressing in from both sides. Every turn seemed sharper, every bend more treacherous, as if the road itself were conspiring against her. The figure at the roadside had moved closer, gliding in ways that defied reason. Its presence was no longer passive. She could feel it, a suffocating force that pressed against her mind and chest alike. Each blink made it seem nearer, closer, patient, yet impossible to escape. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint, almost imperceptible sounds. Footsteps, rustling, a low sigh that seemed to come from nowhere. Emma's heart pounded, pulse racing faster with each passing second. She dared not take her eyes off the road, but every shadow in her peripheral vision seemed alive, stretching and bending toward the car. She stole a glance at the rearview mirror. The darkness behind her was thick, almost solid, yet the figure seemed to slip through it effortlessly, tracking her with unwavering intent. Her stomach churned with a fear that wasn't just instinctive. It was visceral, primal. The girl at the passenger seat, no one was there. Yet the sensation of presence persisted, as though the night itself had taken form within the car. Emma realized she was no longer driving through a highway, but through a living nightmare, one that anticipated her every move, that fed on every ounce of dread she carried. A low hum resonated in the car, subtle at first, then rising into a vibration she could feel in her chest and jaw. The figure's proximity intensified it, a warning, a promise, a silent countdown to something inevitable. Emma's pulse thundered as she forced herself forward. Every mile, every bend, every shadow felt like a trap closing around her. The night had become more than darkness. It was a predator, patient and intelligent, and she had nowhere to hide. She exhaled sharply, trying to steady her racing thoughts. But the figure pressed on, always at the edge of perception, and Emma knew that the confrontation she feared was just moments away. The night was ready, and she was caught in its path. Emma's heartbeat raced as the highway stretched endlessly ahead. The figure at the roadside no longer felt distant or detached. It was alive in her mind, a presence she could feel pressing against every nerve. Every flicker of shadow, every whisper of wind seemed to echo its patience, its intent, its inevitability. Suddenly the figure stepped partially onto the road. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It didn't rush, didn't chase, but the movement alone was enough to terrify her. She slammed her foot on the brake, tires squealing, the car shuddering, but the figure didn't flinch. The air in the car grew impossibly cold. Frost-like patterns began forming along the edges of the windshield, each breath she exhaled visible in the chill. Emma realized with dawning horror that the presence wasn't just outside. It had entered the car, seeping into her space, twisting the air itself into something unnatural. She glanced around desperately, searching for any sign of help, any light in the distance. The highway was empty, silent, except for the faint hum of the tires on asphalt and the relentless pressure of the figure waiting. Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was no escape. The shadows along the roadside shifted subtly, mirroring the figure's movements. Emma could feel them stretching, bending, merging with the night, encroaching closer with every heartbeat. Her pulse thundered as she gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles aching. A whisper drifted through the car, soft and menacing. "You can't leave." Emma's stomach lurched. She could feel the weight of the words, the inevitability behind them. This wasn't just a road. This wasn't just a shadow. This was a trap, patient and meticulous, designed to test her resolve. The figure advanced slightly, its form flickering, bending the darkness around it, an impossible presence that defied reason. Emma's vision tunneled, focus narrowing to the asphalt and the glowing line ahead. She understood then that she was not just being followed. She was being hunted. The night pressed in from all sides, shadows writhing at the edge of her headlights. The figure's intent was clear. It was a test of fear, and she was the prey. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to drive forward, knowing that the highway held no mercy and that her courage, every ounce of it, would be all that stood between her and the darkness. Emma's chest burned as she gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The highway stretched endlessly, twisting in ways that seemed impossible, the shadows pressing in closer with every turn. The figure at the roadside was no longer just a presence. It felt alive, aware, almost intelligent, moving with a patience that made her blood run cold. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the road itself seemed to resist. Each bend brought her closer to the figure, and every mile seemed to stretch longer than possible. The darkness wasn't just around her anymore, it was inside the car, pressing down, filling the space, suffocating her with its weight. Emma's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The figure's reflection was impossible to ignore. Its distorted form seemed to shift, bending reality, defying logic. Each flicker, each movement twisted the familiar into something terrifyingly unknown. The wind howled, rattling the windows, carrying faint whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. The night had become a predator, stalking, calculating, patient. A low hum filled the car, vibrating through the seat and into her bones. Emma exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself, but the figure's influence pressed in relentlessly. Every heartbeat, every blink felt like a countdown to something unavoidable. The shadows along the roadside moved subtly, stretching toward the car, merging, folding into the asphalt. Emma realized with growing horror that this night wasn't just a chase, it was a test, and failure meant more than just fear. She forced herself to focus on the faint glow of the road ahead, the lines of asphalt guiding her forward, but the figure matched every move. It was no longer just an observer, it was a force, patient, unyielding, omnipresent. Emma's pulse thundered as she pushed forward. Each second was a battle, each mile a victory and a warning. The night pressed on, dark, relentless, and she understood fully the confrontation wasn't over until the highway ended. And even then, the memory would linger, patient and waiting for the next traveler. Emma's hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly, her pulse still racing from the relentless pursuit. The highway ahead finally showed the first hints of civilization. Distant lights, faint signs, the gentle hum of a town on the horizon. Relief surged, but it was fragile, tinged with unease. The figure at the roadside remained, but with each mile closer to the town, its presence seemed to waver, like a shadow retreating at the edge of dawn. Emma exhaled shakily, forcing herself to focus on the glowing line of asphalt under her tires, knowing the night wasn't fully over yet. The air inside the car had grown lighter, warmer, yet the memory of the darkness lingered. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of shadow reminded her of what had followed her, and she knew instinctively that the highway had left its mark. Fear had been planted deep in her mind, patient and enduring. Emma glanced at the rearview mirror one last time. The figure was gone, melted back into the shadows, but the memory of its presence pressed into her consciousness. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a warning, a reminder that some nights are alive and some roads are traps waiting for the next traveler. As she drove toward the safety of town, the tension began to fade, replaced by the lingering adrenaline of survival. Yet deep down, Emma knew this encounter would stay with her. In every darkened road, every empty highway, and every whisper of wind through the trees. The night had ended, but the story was far from over. And somewhere beyond the town, another tale waited, another journey down a road shrouded in darkness, another driver ready to test the patience of the night. And so, the stage was set for Story 5. A new road, new shadows, and a new brush with the unknown. Jake had always preferred the quiet of back roads at night. Highways were predictable, crowded, and dull, but these winding roads offered solitude, or so he thought. Tonight, the emptiness felt different, almost deliberate, as if the darkness itself had a presence waiting for him. The headlights cut a narrow path through the night, illuminating trees that swayed like skeletal fingers. Every shadow at the roadside seemed to twitch in unnatural ways. The hum of the engine sounded louder than usual, echoing inside the car like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. At first, Jake tried to convince himself it was just the solitude, the late hour, and his imagination playing tricks, but instinct gnawed at him, that primal sense that something unseen was out there, patient, waiting, and aware of him. Up ahead, a figure appeared, motionless, silent, standing at the edge of the road. Its shape was indistinct in the dim light, but the aura of its presence pressed against him, heavy and cold. Jake slowed, gripping the wheel tighter, debating whether to stop or keep driving. The figure didn't move. It didn't approach or retreat. It simply existed, an observer. And in that observation, a chilling weight settled over Jake. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away, trapped by curiosity and fear alike. The air inside the car grew thick, almost tangible, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic, sharp. Every rustle of leaves along the roadside, every flicker of a shadow, amplified his unease, echoing inside his chest like a warning drum. Jake's pulse quickened. The back roads, empty moments ago, now seemed alive, patient, calculating, intent. He realized he wasn't merely driving, he was being measured, tested. Each mile stretched longer than it should, as though time itself had slowed, holding him in suspense. A low whisper seemed to drift in from the edges of the trees. He blinked, heart hammering. The seat beside him remained empty, yet the feeling of being watched pressed in with suffocating intensity. The night was no longer just quiet. It was alive, aware, and patient. Every turn of the wheel, every beat of his heart made Jake increasingly aware. The back roads were not empty. They were waiting. And the night had chosen him. Jake's hands gripped the wheel tighter as the road stretched ahead, dark and silent. At first, he thought the figure had remained at the roadside, motionless, but a flicker in the rearview mirror made him freeze. Someone was following. Not just with speed, but with patience, matching his pace perfectly, almost gliding across the asphalt. The hum of the engine sounded wrong, amplified, echoing in the car like a heartbeat. each pulse warning him that he wasn't alone. Every shadow beyond the headlights seemed to twist and stretch, shapes forming then dissolving, impossible to fully comprehend. Jake's pulse quickened. He considered turning back, retracing his path, but instinct told him it would accomplish nothing. The figure's presence was deliberate, patient, and aware. It wasn't chasing in a hurry. It didn't need to. Its mere presence was enough to make the night feel suffocating. A sudden rustle along the roadside made him flinch. The trees seemed to lean inward, shadows reaching toward the car, carrying whispers that threaded into his thoughts, unintelligible yet unmistakable. Jake shivered, realizing the back roads weren't just empty. They were alive and aware of him. He stole another glance in the mirror. The figure's shape lingered just beyond visibility, patient and deliberate. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but he knew the normal rules didn't apply here. The night had its own rhythm, and he was trapped in its cadence. The road twisted unnaturally, bends stretching longer than they should. Every mile made him aware of the subtle pressure behind him, an unseen presence observing, studying, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The air inside the car grew colder, heavier, carrying the faint metallic scent of something distant, yet unnervingly close. Every breath felt sharper, more conscious, as though the night itself were testing his resolve. Jake realized the figure wasn't merely following. It was a patient predator, moving in time with him, a silent reminder that he was no longer alone. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the headlights, the back roads whispered a chilling promise. Tonight, there would be no escape. Jake's pulse raced as the headlights swept over the roadside. The figure was closer now, emerging from the shadows with an unsettling stillness. It didn't move like a human. It glided silently, deliberate and controlled, a presence that pressed against him with a weight heavier than the night itself. Every rustle of leaves, every subtle snap of a twig felt amplified, echoing inside the car like a warning. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white, his mind racing to rationalize what he saw. But there was no explanation, only the oppressive awareness of being observed, measured, and tested. The figure lingered at the roadside, patient, deliberate. Its shape flickered, bending shadows around it, almost melting into the darkness, yet remaining unmistakably present. Jake exhaled shakily, realizing that the night had transformed the familiar backroads into a trap, a stage set for this chilling encounter. A low whisper seemed to drift through the air, almost imperceptible, threading into his mind. Jake froze. The seat beside him remained empty, yet the sense of presence was undeniable. He could feel it watching, aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every twitch of fear. The road ahead twisted, the asphalt stretching into an endless corridor of darkness. The figure followed, maintaining its patient, deliberate pace. There was no urgency, only intention, the kind of intention that gnawed at Jake's instincts, making him aware that escape wasn't a matter of speed, but of endurance. The forest pressed closer on either side, shadows bending unnaturally, merging with the figure's presence. Jake swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. The back roads weren't just roads anymore. They were corridors of suspense, patient and relentless, alive with the figure's awareness. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet he couldn't look away, couldn't stop moving forward. The night had become a living entity, the figure its agent, and Jake understood with a cold clarity. The back roads had chosen him, and the encounter had only just begun. Jake's grip on the wheel tightened as the figure seemed to draw closer, gliding alongside the car with a patience that made his skin crawl. Each movement of the shadows around it felt deliberate, synchronized with its silent advance, as if the night itself had joined in the pursuit. The hum of the engine now sounded unnatural, louder, echoing in his chest like a drum marking the passage of fear. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves at the roadside heightened his awareness, a constant reminder that he was being watched, tested. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but the figure's presence demanded attention. Its outline flickered at the edge of the headlights, bending and stretching, impossible to fully comprehend, yet undeniable. Jake realized that it wasn't chasing in haste. It didn't need to. Its patience was far more terrifying than any sudden attack could be. A cold wind swept through the car, carrying whispers that pressed against his thoughts, unintelligible yet insistent. The back roads, once familiar, now felt alien, warped by the figure's presence. Every bend seemed longer, every shadow deeper, as though the forest had conspired to test him. Jake's pulse hammered. The figure's silent observation made him aware of every heartbeat, every flicker of doubt, every twitch of fear. He couldn't turn around, couldn't escape, yet each second felt stretched, loaded with anticipation, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The headlights illuminated patches of trees that seemed alive, twisting toward the road. The figure mirrored the shadows, an extension of the night itself, patient, deliberate, and relentless. Jake understood that he was trapped in a game of endurance, where fear was both the prey and the predator. The tension became almost tangible, pressing on him from all sides. Every step he took forward made the forest and figure feel closer, tighter, more inescapable. The back roads were no longer empty. They were conduits for the night's design, and Jake was the focus. He exhaled shakily, pulse racing as he realized the encounter was far from over. The figure wasn't just following, it was guiding, shaping the night, testing limits, and drawing him deeper into the shadows. Jake's hands trembled on the wheel as the figure glided closer, no longer content to remain at the roadside. Its presence pressed against him, heavy and deliberate, almost as if the darkness itself had taken form. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every path forward felt twisted, uncertain, controlled by the figure's silent intent. The whispers returned, louder now, threading into his mind, impossible to ignore. They weren't words, not in any language he knew, but they carried intention, focus, and patience. A message that he could feel but not interpret. Jake swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, his pulse hammering in rhythm with the tension that seemed to pulse from the shadows themselves. A branch snapped close by, startling him, and for a heartbeat he thought the figure had moved impossibly fast. But when he glanced at the roadside, it remained at the edge of the shadows, patient, deliberate, yet somehow closer than before. Its presence was a tangible weight, pressing into the car, into the night, into Jake's mind. The forest on either side seemed to lean inward, shadows twisting unnaturally, merging with the figure's form. Jake realized with rising dread that it wasn't just following, it was orchestrating the night, shaping the back roads to ensnare him, testing his every reaction. Every flash of the headlights revealed distorted shapes, shadows bending and stretching, impossible yet real. Jake could feel the figure's awareness pressing on him, measuring his fear, his hesitation, and his resolve. Each mile felt stretched, each heartbeat amplified, each breath a reminder that the night had chosen him for this encounter. The car's interior grew colder, the scent of damp earth and faint metallic tang pressing in. Jake's thoughts raced, panic mingling with an eerie fascination. He understood now that the figure wasn't just a passive observer, it was an agent of the night, patient and deliberate, relentless in its testing. Every instinct screamed to act, yet he couldn't predict what would happen if he did. The figure mirrored the shadows, moving with a purpose that made the familiar roads alien, dangerous, alive. Jake exhaled shakily, heart hammering, knowing the night's direct threat had only just begun. The back roads felt alive now, twisting and bending in ways Jake couldn't remember from earlier. Shadows stretched impossibly long, tree branches arched over the asphalt like skeletal fingers, and the wind carried faint whispers that seemed to move in tandem with the figure's presence. Jake gripped the wheel tighter, trying to keep control of the car, but the familiar road felt unfamiliar, warped. Every bend seemed to stretch farther, every shadow deeper, as though the forest and the figure were working together, orchestrating a carefully measured game. The figure glided alongside the car again, silent, deliberate, an extension of the night itself. Its shape flickered at the edge of perception, bending reality, almost blending with the darkness, yet undeniably there, pressing against him with every heartbeat. A cold breeze swept through the car, carrying the faint scent of metal and damp earth, and Jake shivered, realizing the environment itself had become part of the figure's test. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light felt intentional, measured, designed to heighten the tension and fear. The whispers intensified, threading into his thoughts, pressing on his mind, insistent and patient. He could feel the figure studying his reactions, predicting his next moves, pushing him toward a breaking point. The back roads were no longer merely a path. They were a labyrinth, controlled by an unseen hand. Jake tried to keep his focus on the headlights, the circle of light ahead, but even that felt fragile, almost inadequate against the shifting darkness. Every tree seemed to lean closer, every shadow stretched to meet the car, every sound amplified unnaturally, reminding him he was being watched and tested. The figure's presence grew heavier, pressing against him, and Jake realized the environment itself had become an extension of the figure, a deliberate, patient, and relentless force designed to isolate him, disorient him, and escalate the fear. He exhaled shakily, pulse racing, understanding that the night was no longer just a backdrop. It was a participant, alive, patient, and relentless, and he was trapped within its carefully orchestrated tension. Jake's pulse raced as the figure's presence pressed closer, more insistent now. The back roads had become a distorted maze, shadows bending unnaturally, every tree leaning in as if alive, and every sound amplified to a sharp, unnerving clarity. The figure glided along the roadside, closer with each mile, patient yet deliberate, almost mocking in its silent persistence. Jake's grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles white, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, a corridor of tension designed to trap him. Whispers threaded through the night air, impossibly clear, yet unintelligible, pressing into his mind. Jake could feel the figure measuring him, predicting his reactions, testing his resolve. Each blink, each twitch, each heartbeat was counted, and the forest seemed to respond in tandem, bending reality subtly, shifting the road, shaping the shadows. A flash of movement to his left made him swerve slightly, headlights revealing a fleeting figure between the trees, gone the moment he blinked. The back roads weren't just dark, they were alive, orchestrated, every element conspiring to heighten fear, to test endurance, to manipulate his senses. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the faint metallic scent and an almost electric tension that raised goosebumps along his arms. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale visible in the night, each inhale a reminder that he was alone, yet watched by something patient and intelligent. The figure mirrored his every movement, gliding closer, shadows stretching unnaturally to meet it. Jake's mind raced, panic clawing at him, but he forced himself to focus, gripping the wheel, forcing his car forward, step by cautious step. He realized with a shiver that the night wasn't random. Every twist of the road, every rustle of leaves, every flicker of shadow was purposeful, escalating, deliberate. The figure wasn't just following, and it was orchestrating the tension, bending the environment to test his limits. Jake exhaled shakily, pulse hammering, awareness heightened to the maximum. The back roads had transformed into a stage for suspense, fear, and deliberate dread, and the figure was the relentless conductor of this dark symphony. Jake's eyes darted from the road to the rearview mirror, heart hammering. The figure was closer than ever, gliding silently along the roadside, shadows bending unnaturally around it. Every instinct screamed danger, a silent warning that this was no longer just a test. It was a direct threat. The back road seemed to pulse with tension, each bend stretching longer than it should, each shadow darker, every rustle of leaves magnified. The night itself pressed in, a living entity orchestrated by the figure's presence, shaping the environment to isolate him. A flicker of movement to the side made Jake swerve slightly. The headlights revealed a fleeting shape, only for it to vanish when he blinked. The figure had stepped closer, deliberate, patient, almost teasing in its silent approach. The fear coiled tighter in his chest, every nerve on edge. Whispers returned, threading into his thoughts, insistent and pressing. Jake could feel the figure's awareness in every heartbeat, every breath, as if it were inside his mind, observing, judging, waiting for him to falter. The road ahead felt endless, a corridor designed to push him to the brink. The air grew colder, almost tangible, carrying faint metallic and earthy scents that raised goosebumps along his arms. The car's interior felt like a fragile bubble of safety, yet even within it, he could feel the presence pressing in, deliberate and inescapable. Jake forced himself to keep moving, foot steady on the gas, hands gripping the wheel. Each mile stretched longer, each shadow heavier, each whisper sharper. He realized the figure wasn't just following, it was testing him, escalating, drawing him closer to a confrontation that would push him to the edge. The tension coiled tight, every instinct screaming, yet Jake's curiosity and fear forced him forward. The back roads had become a labyrinth of dread, the figure its patient and relentless guide, and the night's climax was approaching with every turn. Jake's chest tightened as the figure drew impossibly close, gliding silently alongside the car. The back roads no longer felt safe or familiar, shadows twisted unnaturally, tree branches arched overhead, and the night pressed in from all sides. Every sound, the engine, rustling leaves, even the faintest breeze seemed amplified, orchestrated to heighten tension. The figure's presence was overwhelming now, patient and deliberate, impossible to ignore. It mirrored every movement, bending the shadows to its will, making the familiar road feel alien. Jake's pulse raced, every heartbeat echoing in his ears like a drum counting down to an unseen moment. Whispers threaded through the night, pressing into his thoughts, insistent and insidious. Jake could feel the figure observing, measuring his fear, anticipating his reactions. The back roads had transformed into a stage, the night itself a participant, and he was the focal point of this dark performance. A sudden movement at the edge of the headlights made him flinch. The figure flickered, bending reality, almost merging with the darkness, yet undeniably there, pressing in with deliberate patience. Jake realized with a shiver that escape wasn't a matter of speed. It was a matter of endurance, focus, and nerves. The cold wind pressed in, carrying metallic and earthy scents that raised goosebumps along his arms. Each bend of the road felt longer, every shadow heavier, every heartbeat sharper. The figure wasn't just following, it was orchestrating the night, manipulating his senses, escalating fear to its peak. Jake exhaled shakily, gripping the wheel, knowing that the climax was near. The figure's silent, deliberate approach, the living tension of the back roads, and the oppressive darkness all converged toward an inevitable moment of confrontation. The night had reached its apex, the suspense wound tight, and Jake realized there was no turning back. The figure was patient, relentless, and the back roads had chosen him to face the culmination of its haunting presence. Jake's hands trembled on the wheel as the figure finally reached its closest point. It didn't attack, didn't move abruptly. It simply existed, patient, deliberate, almost as if it wanted him to understand something he couldn't yet comprehend. The back roads had twisted, shifted, and warped around him, but now the tension seemed to pause, a fleeting calm after the relentless pressure. The whispers faded slightly, though the presence remained, heavy and watchful. Jake exhaled shakily, pulse still racing, realizing the encounter had not ended violently. But the memory, the dread, would linger. The figure seemed to acknowledge him, in a way only a patient entity could. It had tested him, observed him, and now, perhaps, allowed him a measure of reprieve. The back roads stretched ahead, now eerily quiet, the shadows still dense but no longer actively reaching for him. Jake's headlights cut through the darkness steadily, every mile forward feeling like a tentative step back into the normal world. Yet the lingering awareness of being observed never left. Jake finally dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The figure had receded into the night, blending with the shadows, patient and eternal, waiting for the next time, the next observer. The sense of relief was tempered with the knowledge that he had only escaped the night's design, temporarily. As he drove on, the forest slowly returned to normal shapes, the back roads less oppressive, but every twist of the road carried a whisper of the figure's presence. Jake understood that some encounters with the night were lessons, subtle, terrifying, and unforgettable. And with the last mile behind him, the back roads returned to emptiness, leaving only the memory, the fear, and the knowledge that the night could always reclaim its influence. The darkness ahead promised new challenges, and the next story, Story 6, would take him even deeper into the unsettling truths of night drives and unseen observers. Mia had always loved night drives, the quiet hum of the engine, the endless stretch of road ahead, and the solitude of darkness. Tonight, though, the highway felt different, empty, unnerving, and heavy with anticipation, as if the night itself was watching. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, revealing occasional roadside signs and trees swaying in the wind. Every shadow seemed to twitch at the edges of her vision, fleeting shapes that disappeared the moment she focused on them. The hum of the tires on asphalt sounded unnaturally loud inside the car, echoing in rhythm with her quickening heartbeat. At first, Mia convinced herself it was just the isolation, the stillness, the late hour. But instinct gnawed at her, that deep sense that something unseen was aware, patient, and deliberate, waiting. Every mile stretched longer, every turn felt heavier, and the night pressed in, thick and alive. Up ahead, a figure appeared on the shoulder, motionless, almost too still to be human. It stood there, silent and watching, and the weight of its gaze made Mia's skin prickle. She slowed, gripping the steering wheel tighter, debating whether to pass or slow further. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her, yet its presence was undeniable. Every rustle of leaves along the roadside, every flicker of a shadow, amplified her unease. The highway was no longer just a path. It was a corridor of suspense, each mile a test of patience and courage. The air grew colder, carrying a faint metallic scent and something earthy, sharp, and unsettling. Mia shivered, realizing the night was not just quiet. It was alive, aware, and her solitary drive had drawn attention. Every instinct screamed to drive faster, escape, to put distance between herself and the figure, but the road seemed endless, stretching forward without relief. The figure remained, patient and deliberate, a silent observer that made the empty highway feel claustrophobic. Her pulse hammered, breath shallow, as she understood something vital. The night had chosen her for this encounter. And as she drove, the feeling of being watched pressed in from all directions, patient, calculating, and impossible to ignore. Mia's pulse quickened as she noticed movement in the rear-view mirror. At first, she thought it was a trick of the headlights or her imagination, but the figure from the roadside was now following, maintaining a distance, yet perfectly in sync with her speed. The hum of the tires on asphalt seemed louder now, echoing inside the car like a drum marking each heartbeat. Every shadow along the highway twisted unnaturally, stretching toward the vehicle, bending with a purpose that unsettled her. The night had transformed from quiet solitude into something alive, aware, and deliberate. Mia's grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, as she forced herself to focus on the road ahead. The figure remained patient, gliding alongside the car, shadows shifting around it in ways that defied reason. Each flicker at the edge of her headlights carried intent, deliberate and unnerving. The air grew colder, carrying whispers that threaded into her thoughts, insistent and incomprehensible. She shivered, heart hammering, realizing the presence wasn't just following, it was observing, measuring, testing her reaction to each mile. The highway had become a stage, the figure the silent conductor of tension. Mia stole another glance in the rearview mirror. The figure's form flickered, bending the shadows around it, almost merging with the darkness, yet undeniably there. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly, a corridor shaped by the night and its unseen watcher. The whispers intensified, threading through her mind, pressing on her thoughts. She could feel the figure's awareness in every movement, every breath, every blink. The highway was no longer a mere road. It was a conduit for suspense, orchestrated by a patient and relentless presence. Mia exhaled shakily, forcing her foot on the gas, trying to push forward without panicking. The figure matched her movements effortlessly, gliding with a deliberate patience that made the night feel oppressive. Every mile, every shadow, every whisper heightened the tension, making her increasingly aware that the encounter had only just begun. The night stretched ahead, heavy, deliberate, and unyielding. The figure remained behind, patient and calculating, ensuring that Mia understood. This drive was not simply a journey, it was a test, and the highway had chosen her. Mia's heartbeat hammered as the figure drew nearer, gliding silently along the side of the highway. Its form flickered in and out of the shadows, bending reality, yet always unmistakably there, patient and deliberate. Every instinct screamed danger, but her eyes couldn't leave it. The whispers returned, threading into her thoughts, incomprehensible yet insistent. They pressed on her mind, echoing with intent, a reminder that she was no longer simply driving. She was being observed, tested, and manipulated by something beyond reason. A sudden flash of movement to the roadside made her swerve slightly. Her headlights revealed a fleeting shape, gone the instant she blinked. The figure didn't need to chase aggressively. Its patience and silent pressure were far more terrifying. It could control the night simply by existing. The air inside the car grew colder, almost tangible, carrying the faint metallic and earthy scents that raised goosebumps along her arms. The empty highway, once familiar, now felt like a corridor of suspense, every mile designed to heighten tension, every shadow designed to unnerve her. Mia exhaled shakily, pulse hammering, realizing that escape wasn't a matter of speed. the figure could match her pace without effort. Every turn, every bend, every stretch of road seemed orchestrated, guided by the presence lurking just beyond the light. The figure glided closer, patient and deliberate, shadows stretching unnaturally, almost wrapping around her car. Her breath came in shallow gasps, every sense heightened. The night had transformed from quiet solitude into a living, calculating presence, and she was trapped in its design. Each mile felt longer, each heartbeat sharper, every shadow heavier. Mia understood with a cold clarity. The highway was no longer empty, the night was not silent, and the figure's patience was a weapon more dangerous than any sudden attack. The tension coiled tight around her, every instinct screaming to react, yet every move she made was anticipated, measured, and observed. The first encounter had begun, and the night was just warming up. Mia's pulse raced as the highway seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally, shadows deepening, trees leaning over the asphalt like skeletal sentinels. The figure's presence pressed closer, patient and deliberate, shaping the night around her. Every mile became heavier, every bend unnervingly long, every whisper threading into her mind. The wind carried a chill that wasn't just from the open road. It pressed against her, almost tactile, carrying scents of damp earth and metallic tang that made her skin prickle. The night was no longer passive. It was alive, aware, and conspiring with the figure to isolate her. The headlights flickered over shapes in the roadside, glimpses of movement that vanished before she could fully comprehend them. The figure glided alongside the car, silent and patient, almost teasing, bending the shadows to its will. It didn't need to attack. Its mere presence transformed the environment into a test of fear and endurance. Every instinct screamed to accelerate, to escape, but the road felt infinite, stretching forward like a corridor of suspense. The figure mirrored her movements effortlessly, manipulating the perception of distance, time, and shadows. The night had become a living maze, and she was at its center. Mia's grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles white, as she forced herself to keep moving. Each bend of the road, each flicker of light, each whisper in the wind amplified the tension. The figure wasn't just following, it was orchestrating the night, making her aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every twitch of fear. The shadows shifted unnaturally, almost sentient, bending toward the car, merging with the figure's presence. Mia shivered, realizing the environment itself had become an instrument of suspense, designed to push her nerves to the edge. The highway stretched ahead, heavy with anticipation, every shadow alive, every whisper deliberate. The figure remained alongside, patient, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Mia understood that the night was not merely a backdrop. It was an active participant in the encounter, testing her endurance, her courage, and her perception of reality. Mia's heartbeat pounded as the figure moved closer, no longer content to simply follow. Its presence pressed against her, deliberate and patient, shadows twisting unnaturally around it. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she couldn't take her eyes off it. The whispers grew louder, threading into her thoughts, pressing insistently. They weren't words, but they carried intent, a silent warning that the figure was testing her, measuring her reactions with every mile. The empty highway felt suffocating, each bend and shadow orchestrated to escalate fear. A sudden rustle at the roadside made her flinch. The headlights revealed a fleeting glimpse of the figure's shape, gone the instant she blinked. Its silence was deliberate, patient, and far more terrifying than any sudden attack. It didn't need to move aggressively. The tension alone was enough to unnerve her. The wind carried a cold, metallic tang that seemed almost alive, pressing into her skin. The shadows along the highway shifted unnaturally, bending toward her car, stretching, alive with intent. The night was no longer just dark. It was aware, calculating, and deeply patient. Mia exhaled shakily, gripping the wheel, pulse hammering. The figure mirrored her movements perfectly in sync, making escape feel impossible. Every mile ahead felt longer, every heartbeat sharper, each whisper threading deeper into her awareness. The environment itself seemed to conspire with the figure. Trees arched closer, shadows twisted toward the asphalt, and the night wrapped tighter around her car. The highway had become a corridor of tension, a living instrument of suspense, and she was at the center of it. Mia's breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed forward, understanding fully that the figure's patience was a weapon, the night a trap, and her endurance the only thing keeping her moving. Each mile heightened the fear, every shadow carried intent, and the back roads of night drove her deeper into suspense. Mia's pulse raced as the highway seemed to shift around her, bends stretching unnaturally, shadows deepening, and trees arching over the road like looming sentinels. The figure's presence pressed closer, patient and deliberate, as if it could bend reality itself to heighten her fear. The wind carried whispers that threaded into her thoughts, insistent and eerie, impossible to ignore. They weren't words, yet each one felt like a warning, a deliberate probe into her mind, testing her reactions, her courage, and her resolve. The headlights revealed fleeting shapes at the roadside, glimpses that vanished before she could fully process them. The figure mirrored these distortions, gliding silently alongside her car, bending shadows, twisting perception, making every mile feel longer, heavier, more uncertain. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the road stretched endlessly like a corridor shaped by the figure's patience. The night itself had become a participant, orchestrating every flicker of movement, every bend, every whisper, to disorient and heighten tension. Mia gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, breath ragged. Each shadow seemed alive, reaching, bending toward the car, merging with the figure's silent presence. The back roads were no longer familiar. They were instruments of suspense, every detail carefully designed to keep her on edge. Her pulse thundered as she realized the figure wasn't just following, it was manipulating, testing, and controlling the environment, heightening her fear with patient precision. Every mile, every heartbeat, every blink was measured, each second stretching longer than the last. The night wrapped tighter around her car, heavy and deliberate, shadows bending unnaturally, whispers threading insidiously. Mia understood fully now that she was trapped in a living nightmare. The figure and the highway working in tandem, patient, calculating, and inescapable. Mia's pulse thundered as the figure moved closer, no longer content to remain at the edge of the road. Its presence pressed against her, deliberate and heavy, shadows stretching unnaturally, almost as if the darkness itself had come alive. The whispers intensified, threading into her mind with insistent urgency, pressing on her thoughts in ways that made rationality slip. She could feel the figure observing, predicting every blink, every breath, every twitch of fear. The highway had transformed from a path into a stage of suspense, every mile orchestrated to heighten tension. A sudden flash of movement at the roadside made Mia flinch. The headlights caught the figure for a split second, its shape flickering, bending reality, impossibly close, and yet just beyond reach. The patience that had defined it until now was replaced by a calculated pressure, escalating the threat in subtle but undeniable ways. The wind carried an almost metallic tang, cold and sharp, pressing against her skin, wrapping the car in an invisible weight. The shadows twisted and shifted, leaning toward the vehicle, merging with the figure's presence. The night itself seemed to tighten, amplifying fear, suspense, and the unrelenting sense of being trapped. Mia's hands shook on the wheel, knuckles white. She pressed forward, trying to maintain control, every instinct screaming to flee. But the road stretched endlessly, the bends and shadows designed to disorient, to amplify every heartbeat, to trap her in this escalating tension. The figure mirrored her movements with unnerving precision, gliding effortlessly alongside the car. Each mile heightened the suspense, every shadow carried intent, and every whisper threaded deeper into her awareness. The encounter was no longer just a test, it had become a direct, escalating threat. Mia's breath came in ragged gasps, pulse hammering, awareness heightened to its maximum. She understood that the night and its relentless agent had full control over the backroads, her senses, and the tension that gripped her. Escape would not be simple. It would require wit, courage, and endurance against a patient, calculating force. Mia's heart raced as the figure closed the distance, gliding silently alongside her car. The shadows twisted unnaturally, bending toward the vehicle, and every instinct screamed danger. The night felt alive, pressing in on her, deliberate, patient, and unyielding. A sudden flicker at the edge of her headlights made her swerve slightly. For a brief second, the figure seemed impossibly close, almost merging with the car, then vanished, leaving a lingering chill. The encounter was no longer distant. It was intimate, invasive, and inescapable. The whispers threaded into her mind again, incomprehensible, yet insistent, pressing on her thoughts with deliberate weight. She could feel the figure observing every blink, every twitch, every breath. The highway had become a living corridor of suspense, each mile stretching longer than it should, every shadow alive with intent. The wind carried a metallic, earthy tang, pressing cold and sharp against her skin. The back roads were no longer simply roads, they were a maze of dread, orchestrated by the figure's patient, relentless manipulation. Every turn, every stretch, every rustle of leaves amplified the fear threading through her. Mia's grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles white, pulse hammering. The figure's presence was deliberate, patient, and inescapable. She realized that the night was testing her endurance, patience, and courage, drawing her deeper into a living nightmare that seemed to stretch endlessly forward. Every mile forward increased tension, every shadow held purpose, and every whisper pressed deeper into her mind. The figure wasn't just following, it was shaping the night around her, orchestrating fear with careful precision. Mia's breath came in short, ragged gasps, awareness sharpened to its limits. The near encounter had shown her the night's true power, patient, calculating, and impossible to outrun. She understood that the climax of this drive and the night's test was approaching. Mia's pulse hammered as the figure drew impossibly close, gliding silently alongside her car. The back road seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows twisting unnaturally, trees bending like skeletal sentinels over the asphalt. Every sound, the tires on the road, the whispering wind, the rustling leaves, was amplified, orchestrated to heighten her fear. The figure's presence pressed in, deliberate and patient, yet far more menacing than sudden aggression. Its patience had become a weapon, a calculated pressure that manipulated her perception, making every mile feel like an eternity. The whispers threaded into her thoughts insistently, echoing with intent, a reminder that she was entirely observed and measured. A sudden flicker in the headlights revealed the figure's shape for a split second, bending reality, impossibly close, and yet elusively distant. The silence around it was deafening, more terrifying than any movement could have been. The night had transformed into a living entity, and Mia was at its mercy. The cold, metallic scent in the air, grew stronger, pressing into her senses, sharp and tangible. Shadows seemed alive, bending toward the car, merging with the figure's presence. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the road stretched endlessly, a corridor designed to trap her in the escalating tension. Mia's breath came in short, ragged gasps, knuckles white on the wheel. Every flicker of movement, every whisper, every bend of the road felt orchestrated, purposeful, designed to bring her to the apex of fear. The figure mirrored her every move, patient, deliberate, impossible to outrun. The back roads had become a stage of suspense, the figure the silent conductor, and Mia the focus of its relentless attention. The climax of this night was at hand. Tension wound tight, fear sharpened to its peak, and escape seemed impossible. She exhaled shakily, heart racing, fully aware that the next moments would define whether the night would release her or consume her in its patient, calculated grip. Mia's hands shook on the wheel as the figure finally receded, slipping back into the shadows. It hadn't attacked, hadn't moved with sudden aggression. Its silence and patience had been the most terrifying weapon of all. The back roads stretched ahead, dark and quiet once more, yet the lingering tension pressed in, heavy and insistent. The whispers faded, leaving only the cold night air and the faint metallic tang that had clung to the highway. Mia exhaled shakily, pulse still racing, realizing that she had survived the encounter, but the memory, the dread, would remain. The figure had tested her endurance, patience, and courage, and in its own deliberate way allowed her a reprieve. The empty highway returned to normal shapes, trees upright, shadows no longer twisting unnaturally, yet every mile forward reminded her of the night's invisible presence. Mia understood that some encounters with darkness were lessons, subtle, terrifying, and unforgettable. The figure had vanished, but the memory lingered, a shadow inside her mind that would never fully leave. Her headlights cut a steady path through the road ahead, and with each mile, the oppressive tension began to lift, replaced by cautious relief. Yet she couldn't shake the awareness that the night remained patient, that the figure could return whenever the back roads called another traveler. Mia exhaled once more, gripping the wheel tighter, knowing she had survived something far more deliberate and calculating than random chance. The night had tested her, the shadows had measured her fear, and the experience would stay with her long after she reached safety. And as the highway stretched onward into the distance, the lesson remained clear. The night is patient, the shadows are deliberate, and some drives are never truly alone.